Welcome to the Man with No Name podcast. I'm your host, the Man with No Name. I'm no single man, yet I'm every person. I'm you, exploring the highs and lows, the shared journey of parenthood, marriage, spiritual healing, and personal growth. Thanks for joining me. Over the Threshold, a spinal cord injury, a miracle mindset, and the power of manifestation. Scott Saumsiegle's story. Welcome back to the Man with No Name podcast. Today's episode features a friend and a remarkable human being, Scott Saumsiegle. In 2020, Scott suffered a traumatic spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed from the waist down. But what followed wasn't just physical rehab. It was a mental, emotional, and spiritual rebirth. We talk about the moment when a 1-inch threshold literally became the test of his will to walk again. We dive into the dark nights of the soul, his rediscovery of faith, and the teachings of Dr. Joe Dispenza that helped reshape his mind and body. This episode is for anyone who has felt stuck, broken, or lost. There is always a way through. Before we dive in, if you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite platform. It helps more people find these stories and reminds me that these conversations matter. You can also share this episode with someone who needs it today. Now let's get into it. Scott Saumsiegle, thanks for joining me on this episode of this podcast, and it's really, really great to see you. It's been a long, long time. You and I have been friends for many, many years, and also co-workers at one point in a different lifetime or different life. And it's been a while. It's good to sit in front of you for the first time, I think in 15 years?
Yes,
Something
that's
around
crazy.
Yeah.
Yes, yep.
And it's great to catch up, and really I wanted to catch up with you and at the same time kind of document and chronicle your story, because you have quite an interesting story beyond our professional ties and personal ties. And it's a story about trauma, healing, and then beyond as well.
Correct.
So I'll let you tell the story and kind of ask you questions to walk through that day of the incident or the accident, however you want to refer to it.
Yeah.
But is it safe to say up until that point, just relatively normal life every day?
Normal life, a bit on the crazy extreme side, but pretty much normal life. Yeah, I guess you would say the path of, family, house, job, activities, friends. Yeah.
Okay. So take me to that day. For the audience listening, you had a traumatic incident.
I did.
Why don't you take me through that day? Start at the beginning. What was the day like? And then what were you doing and what happened?
Okay. So this day happened almost 5 years ago, March 28th, 2020. This was the first week or the second week of COVID, when COVID really struck the country and everyone had orders to stay home for 2 weeks and it'll all go away. Remember that crazy time?
Unfortunately, I do.
Right. And everyone probably remembers where they were when all this came down. So being an active guy, never can really sit still. I was home, and it was a warm spring. And I live across the street. In between a house and my neighbor is a patch of woods. And I have a neighbor, an older guy. He's like the best neighbor you could ever want. He could fix everything with a Craftsman wrench and a can of WD-40. And there was we had always been working with trees and the yard. And he heats his house with wood. And now there was a big oak tree in the woods. And being bored, I was out there with him. I said, "Hey, Rich, why don't we cut this tree down and you can have all the wood, you can stack it and cord it and, use it to burn for next season." So we looked at the tree, we looked around, we determined that there was a giant limb that stuck out on the right, and it was very twisted, and it was a giant tree in itself. And we determined that would have to be cut down first, otherwise the tree would have got all hung up. So it was later in the afternoon. I went back to my truck to take off my work boots because I figured we would tackle this in the morning. And I looked out in the woods, and he had set up a ladder, and he had 3 chainsaws and all this equipment. So put my boots back on. I walked out there, and I said, "Oh, you want to do this now?" And he said, "Let's just cut the limb first." So I'll kind of speed this up. But during that time, my wife
Take your time.
was really upset and worried about COVID. And she didn't want anything to happen because you knew if something happened during COVID, people can't be with anybody, right? It was all this ridiculous rules at the time. So I walked out in the woods, and there he was. There's my neighbor with the couple of chainsaws and the ladder. And I said, great, I'll run up and we'll cut this limb down and we'll do the rest tomorrow. So I started up a chainsaw. It was a small one. It wasn't that big. And I got it running, and here I am, one hand over the other, climbing up this ladder. And now when I look back, I determine, I believe it was about a 30-foot, 28-foot ladder. So we're talking maybe 2 stories or a little bit less. And I get up to the very single top. So I was maybe like 4 rungs from the very top, enough to like where my knees could hit the top of the ladder and I could lean into the tree. So my left hand is wrapped around the tree with my fingernails digging in, holding myself steady. My right hand now is dangling with this chainsaw that's running, and I'm giving it gas, and I lift up the chainsaw, and I get it on the limb. The limb, we had it set up so the limb was like behind us because everything was about safety, what my neighbor set up. And I cut the limb, cutting it, and I cut it, and all of a sudden this biggest crack, and I see the limb crash to the ground, leaves and debris fly up, and my hand, goes down because now I'm resting because the chainsaw, like it was heavy, like holding a chainsaw with one hand up. And this is all within a split second. And I kind of looked at my neighbor and gave the professional nod like we did it. And then when I was in that kind of relaxed moment, what I didn't realize, the branch landed, the branches came to settle, and it ricocheted and came back and hit my ladder. All I heard was the sound of like if you had an aluminum ladder and you dropped it from like 10 feet and you could hear that noise. That's the noise I heard. If I were to write a book, this would be like an entire chapter. So I got ripped from the tree. And I'll never forget, I could feel my fingernails, that they were dug into that bark of that oak tree. I could remember feeling them get ripped away. And everything stopped at that moment. I was almost in what I would call the Matrix. I could see leaves floating by me. I could see debris. I could see the sunset. And I looked down, I looked at my neighbor. And now he wasn't right where he was before. He was in a different position. So I was in midair at that point, but I was suspended in this space. And I remember just kind of looking around, caught in this moment that wouldn't end. And then when I looked down, that's when everything broke. And I just hit the ground like in an instant, in a thud. And the way I landed, I was falling backwards, like kind of like I would land on my back, but my heels struck first. So heels, like butt, back, head. I was knocked unconscious because my head hit the ground so hard, my whole body. And the minute I hit, something electrical went through my body, like almost like a huge stretched rubber band breaking. And I could feel it, and I felt it from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, and everything went numb. And I remember opening my eyes, like in severe pain. I had cracked ribs, and I remember looking down, just like laying down and looking down at my leg. My right leg was turned in an awkward position, and I couldn't feel anything. And panic kind of set in because everybody's worst fear, at least mine is if you ever lost your legs or if ever, you were paralyzed, and that vision of being paralyzed is a scary thing. And that was happening. All of this now was happening to me. My neighbor came up behind me and he whispered in my ear and he said, "Scott, it should have been me." And again, I must have blacked out again. Next thing I know, I saw my daughter. My neighbor ran over, who was a physician assistant, and she grabbed my arms and she pulled them up and she said, "Scott, squeeze my fingers, squeeze my fingers." And I remember looking at my fingers and squeezing so hard. I could see the whites, my thumbs turning white. And I thought to myself, all right, I can move my hands. I can move my arms. But I knew I couldn't feel my legs. I knew I was in trouble. All of a sudden, the paramedics were there. It was the most painful thing when they tried to move me. I even screamed out in pain, like the sound of a grown man being in that much pain. It's not even a scream. I don't even know what the words were to describe the noises I was making, but I couldn't open my eyes. The pain was so hard, I had to just like close my eyes and concentrate and, grit my teeth and like hold my fists in a ball. And, they got me on the gurney. My daughter, I remember reaching for her hand as I was getting loaded into the ambulance, and then they pushed her away because it was COVID. They said no one can come with us. Everybody's 6 feet away. I mean, it was a panic in that moment because everybody was in 6 feet. But you remember that nonsense of COVID, how everyone had to stay 6 feet away, even in those crazy moments. So sadly, I didn't get a chance to really see my wife or anyone else except my oldest daughter, who was trying to help me and who was going to go with me. The ambulance doors shut, and I was rushed to a trauma unit. And the trip to the first hospital was every bump in the road sent me into a shockwave of pain you've never felt. I was in so much pain and the road was so bumpy, I actually felt like I levitated out of my body and I was looking down at my body because the whole time, again, my eyes were clenched shut. And I remember like opening my eyes for a second, and one of the other paramedics that were in the back with me trying to maybe stabilize me or help me out, he was staring at me like, "Are you okay?" Because I couldn't open my eyes. And the first hospital couldn't handle me because I was a trauma. I was a spinal cord injury. They didn't have the equipment to set up for trauma. So I was rerouted to a place called Leahy Medical Center in Burlington, Massachusetts. And I don't know if we want to talk about that, but so that was about 40 minutes away or half-hour ride. Again, the pain was so bad, all I could do was shut my eyes, grit my teeth, hold my fists in a ball as hard as I could, and just grunt and bear with it. And there was a flurry activity when we got there. It was like the movies. I couldn't really see what was going on, but everything I could see was, people rushing out to the parking lot or the parking area, getting me into a gurney. Everyone, 1, 2, 3, lifting me into a bed now in the hospital, and I was wheeled into the ICU. There, I was put on. There was things happening to me. There were intravenous in every arm. Things that were now out of my control. I felt like I was just now in a world where I'm going to just let them do what they need to do and try to deal with this pain. And they finally settled me down somehow, like they must have given me some kind of pain to initially just numb everything. But I still couldn't open my eyes. And test after test after test, and all I kept thinking about was my family. Do they even know where I am? Do they even know what's happening? How on earth can I even maybe get in touch with them? But I can't. No, I had no phone. I had just nothing except what I was brought in, the time of when I fell off the tree, just in my work clothes and work boots. So there I laid in this bed. I do remember a nurse very calmly and she was like a beautiful voice just whispering. She knew the pain I was in, and she was asking me if I was cold, do I need anything? And I do remember her giving me blankets and really, really making me feel as comfortable as possible. And she did whisper a few things like, it's going to be okay, and we're working on trying to give you pain. And she said, we'll notify your family, and I'll give you some more information as the night goes on. So I don't know how many hours passed, but she said you'll be having a surgery that'll last 6 to 7 hours in the morning, starting I think at 5 a.m. is when everybody scrubs in for the surgical team. I just said, okay, thank you. And then that was the last thing I remember. They must have given me some kind of drugs to just knock me out and get some sleep.
How long after the initial fall was that roughly?
I'm going to say this is probably 2.5, 3 hours have passed.
So did they tell you what was broken yet? Were they able to do any scans or MRIs? Did you know at this point?
They did. In fact, you're right. I'm sorry. During that flurry, as they were getting me comfortable, I did have an MRI, and I had never had an MRI before, but I was so like now heavily medicated. I was just at this I was like a helpless state. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move, couldn't feel anything, and was just in this MRI machine. I think we did 2 separate MRIs. I think I had a different type of X-ray to look at my back, and clearly, as they discovered what was wrong, that's when the medical team and the trauma team and the surgeons were getting together, at least either on the phone or Skype at that point for the next day. So to me, things are happening in a way that I felt comfortable. And remember, I really didn't have any input. I couldn't really speak, and I was so hurt that nothing was in my control.
So the next day you had surgery. Walk me through that experience.
So here's where my story starts to get interesting. So
like it's not interesting already.
Right. So, and I'm going to weave some things in that I would call like angels, or now when I look back and tell the story, these things made sense, but at the time I didn't really notice. But so I get woken up must have been like 5 a.m. And Scott, you're getting prepped for surgery. I was so groggy. I had the hat on. You see people going for surgery, the hair net. I was just in, I think, a scrub at that point. I didn't even know what my body looked like. And here I am in a bed getting moved down the hall, and all I could look up was, doorways, lights. It was like the movie. Out of the blue, somebody grabbed my hand and held it so tight and said, "Scott, I love you. I'm here to help you, and I'm here to be here for your family and your wife." And I kind of looked up, and it was this woman, Marie, who we're friendly with, but we don't know her that well. She's a friend of a friend, and she, knows who we are, knows who I am. And her story was she was off of work for like 2 or 3 days, and at 10 o'clock or something o'clock at night, she got a call from her colleague and said, "Hey, I know you're off for 3 days, but I can't do my shift in the morning. Can you fill in?" So she, like it was meant to be, or it was prayers. People were praying for me. This was somehow an intervention that was meant to be, I feel, because she was there to be an extension of like my family and my wife. And when she scrubbed in at 5 a.m. or whatever it was, she looked on the board and saw Saumsiegle and said, "I know that guy. I found him." And she was right there with me until I got wheeled in, till they put the drugs in me to knock me out. And, it was just like a movie. The bright lights of the operating table, the mask coming over my nose and saying, "Scott, start the count 10 to 1 backwards."
At this point, did you know you had a spinal cord injury? Like, obviously you did, but did they tell you? Did they say, "Hey, you're C4, C5, whatever injury it was at this point"? Or did you just know that you were hurt really bad, you were paralyzed, couldn't feel anything, you're going to surgery? Tell me about the prognosis.
Yes. So, and that's a good question. I feel like I knew, and I think maybe it was Marie that told me, because I might have said, "Do we know what I'm doing? Do we know what's happening?" She says, "You're going for a major back surgery. Your T11, it looks like has been compromised." They didn't tell me what it was, if it was a complete paralysis, incomplete. I didn't have all those details yet. I just knew that I was having a major surgery and they had to open up my back. And that was it. So, when that thing came over my nose to knock me out, at that point, I knew right then and there that I was completely helpless, and I gestured. I didn't do it physically, but my body opened up, my arms went out to my side, and I basically gave in to everything I could and surrendered. I basically surrendered and said, powers that be, God, energy, anybody, if this is the way I go, I accept it. And if I don't wake up, I accept it. If I'm going to be saved, please, I accept it and I surrender. And that was the last thing I did, because I was at a point of 100% vulnerability, helplessness, and I had never been in that situation before. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was that. That was the initial accident to going under for my surgery.
How long did the surgery last, and what was it like when you woke up?
Well, they said it was like a 5 to 7 hour surgery. I'm not exact on the term. I know it was over 5. So and after a surgery like that, that's major. And I obviously was in a recovery room. All I remember was opening my eyes or waking up in a way. And I felt really warm. I felt very comfortable. And all I could see was like a white wall in a window and a white ceiling. It was when I look back now, it was like, am I alive? Like, is this the next step? I didn't know. And I was so groggy, but I remember looking out that window and I remember seeing the blue sky and some clouds. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm alive. I made it. I made it. I don't know what my future looks like, but I'm alive. I'll be able to, see my kids get married and graduate and hopefully, live a life. I don't know what it's going to be like at this point, but I'm alive. And that was when just, slowly as you wake up from a surgery like that, it takes a long time. And I couldn't feel or move anything, not even my hands and my arms at that point. So maybe like hours went by where then I started to move my hands, but I could feel nothing from the waist down. And all I thought was, the surgery didn't work, or I didn't know how this was going to work, but clearly I could feel nothing. And that's when nurses came in. I noticed, I was obviously in the ICU unit. Nurses came in. The looks on their faces told me everything as well. It was just sympathy. Like, look at this poor man. He's never going to walk again. Nobody really said anything. And then Marie showed up. And she was just like the extension of like my wife and my family. She was full of love. She held my hand. She's like, you made it. You got through. That was a major surgery. I was right there in the room the whole time. And she gave such faith with the surgeon. Like, she said, he's amazing. You're actually so lucky that everything worked out, that he was the one to do it. And, I just was so thankful for her, thankful for that, thankful for her being able to be with me. And if there was any special treatment, hopefully I got it. And, that was really how it was. That was day one. I think I fell asleep. I think that was all day of like waking up in a way. And then it was nighttime again. And I think I was finally moved to my room.
Got 2 questions, and the first, they're related to each other. So the first one is this, for the listeners and for me, really, specifically, what exactly was it? A crushing of a thoracic vertebrae? And for the listeners that don't have a medical background, your thoracic vertebrae are the upper back. It's right underneath your cervical and above your low back.
Correct.
Right? Your lumbar is your low back, your cervical is your neck. So you had a upper back vertebrae injury with a spinal cord injury. Can you tell me exactly, was it crushed? And then tell me about the spinal cord. Was it severed? How much of it was it severed? Was it ruptured? Give me the picture on that.
Yeah, so I didn't have these details then and there, but what it was a T11. I'm sorry, my T12, excuse me. It was a T12 burst fracture where pieces of the vertebrae were broken and it was completely crushed and burst, and during that injury compromised the spinal cord through swelling, and what I heard was, pieces of bone. So they labeled it an incomplete paralysis. And, through, the research that I've done, there's complete and there's incomplete, both of which people can never walk again. I believe the incomplete is where there's a chance that there might be able to have feeling. So maybe you'll never be able to walk again, but you would feel somebody touch your foot or touch your leg. And that was the diagnosis, or what I had.
And you had an incomplete
Paralysis, correct.
Paralysis.
Yes.
So your spinal cord was severed to a certain degree.
Yes, and compromised, right.
Right, but
yes.
not completely severed.
Correct.
Where it was cut in half. Or,
yes.
Okay.
Right.
So with that said, obviously you knew that you're paralyzed, but at some point somebody told you about all this. And did it sink in right away that you had that magnitude of an injury? And then when did it set in your mind that at the time at least, I can't walk again. I'm paralyzed.
Well, those feelings were the first day. When I woke back up the second day, I was awoken at like 6 a.m. You know, in the hospital, the day starts really early. So the first day, my sheet was, I was woken up, my sheet was taken from me, and I could feel a pressure. I couldn't feel anything. And I opened my eyes, and there were two doctors with clipboards, like residents almost, and they were like, "Can you wiggle a toe? Wiggle a toe. We're doing a follow-up." And I was kind of startled. I was like, "Okay." And I shut my eyes and was like all my power from my brain to down to my toe, what that would look like. And I tried to wiggle a toe. And in that moment, I couldn't open my eyes because I was trying to wiggle a toe and concentrate. And when I opened them, they were walking out the door and they said, "We saw nothing." And I was like left like, okay. And, so that wasn't very reassuring. And, now the pain was starting to get worse. My life in the hospital became extremely complicated. I don't know if you want me to run through like the things that happened to me, but I had learned that I had a less than 5% chance of walking. Right now at the hospital, what they want to do is get the pain under control and start my, slow possible recovery. But that would be further down the road. But the days in the hospital would be my most challenging and my darkest and my saddest. But my saddest days hadn't even happened yet because I was still in this process that am I ever going to walk again? Right then and there in the hospital, I thought maybe I did. I didn't know what they had done to my back, but I thought maybe the end results was I'll be feeling better soon and, I'll be discharged in 10 days and I'll walk home. So that wasn't the case. The next day, pain levels got worse. I couldn't, nerve pain, if I were to tell this audience, there's no way to describe nerve pain except it feels like everything is on burning fire, frozen numbness. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's that horrendous nerve pain that never goes away. And it radiates so much, your body, you can't even do anything. You can't even really open your eyes because you're in this clenched position trying to control this pain. So you can just imagine the hospital trying to figure this out. I believe I was on methadone low dose, which worked amazing. And actually, what that drug does for pain in the right dose is really, really helpful. Obviously, there were some other narcotics. There was Dilaudid, which really messes with your brain. And this was going on for 2 or 3 days now. We were trying to get the right dose. So then they added lidocaine drip. And they started that probably like around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Because I remember things, again, nighttime, like the night shift, the nurses were starting to switch. And I was getting the lights dimmed in my room. And I was in my room. And here's where this story gets interesting. I'll never forget. I was laying down on my bed, obviously on my back. And my arm was like, my elbow was resting on me with my wrist cocked right in front of my face. And I talked to my hand and my arm the entire night. And I was in a delusion. I had succumbed to a really horrifying delusion where I thought my arm was a person and I was talking to it all night. And it was very detailed conversation. It was thorough. It was deep. And the whole time also, I could hear outside my room all the nurses and a group of nurses, mostly all women and girls, and I could hear him laughing, and I could hear him saying things like, yeah, let's do this to this vein and do this to that, and maybe it'll make him wet his pants and do all that. And they were laughing, and I could hear those nurses and everyone conspiring against me. And I said to my arm, I said, they're not going to get me. I'm going to control this, and they're not going to mess with me. And I screamed out the door, I can hear you guys. I know what you're saying. I know you're trying to mess with me. And that's when I started to pluck each IV out of my arm.
Oh, man.
And one of them controlled my heart rate. So the nurses would run in a flurry and say, what are you doing? You can't do this. And I would just look at them and say, I know what you guys are doing to me. You can't do that to me. I'm the patient. And they're like, they obviously had no idea what was going on. And it was terrible. I was in this delusion that no one could tell me otherwise. And, the pro nurses didn't know it at first, but I was yelling at them. I was so mean to them. I'd scream out the door, I can hear you guys. And of course, there was no one outside the door. And this went on for an entire day. And I kept seeing a different nurse, and then a different doctor came in, all trying to figure this out. And it was bad. This was an entire day of this, and it was now becoming nighttime again. And they, were trying to control this. And then Marie shows up, and Marie's like, Scott, listen, sometimes, these things can happen, but, just trust it. And I said, all right, Marie, like, I trust you. And then when she left the room, again, I heard nurses laughing and talking, which they weren't, but I heard that. And I said to myself, oh, they got to her too. So I can't trust anyone. And then a nurse came in and said, hey, can you tell us your wife's phone number? And I said, sure, 1-800 shut up, and to get him out. And because I knew they were going to try to maybe tell my wife and get her involved. And so somehow they got her on the phone, and my phone rang in my room, and the nurse said, Scott, can you get that? And I was very leery and non-trusting, and I don't mean to carry on this part of the story so long, but it was so terrible. And I remember talking to my wife, and she said, Scott, sometimes there's reactions to drugs, and, listen, I'm on your side, and I've already told the nurses to let's stop everything. And then whatever she said, I remember holding the phone out like this, and I said, they got to you too. And I hung it up on her face. And I was alone. I was trapped. I was alone. I couldn't trust anyone. And at this point, another nurse came in. She had a ponytail. I believe her name was Tracy. She was an NP. She was awesome. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and she said, we're going to fix this. And for some reason, I trusted her. And, I heard her go back into the other nurses. And then things like, I felt my veins, like I could feel things travel through my body again and just kind of let go. And then at that point, I said to myself, I said, my mind started to get clearer and clearer and clearer. And I just realized I was in a delusion that I couldn't control, and I was finally getting out of it. So I wish delusions on nobody. It was the worst feeling to ever be in. So that was day 3, I think. So everything was so horrendous at this point, trying to figure out the pain. But we knew no more lidocaine drip with all that concoction that I was on. So after that, they got it to a point where it was enough stable to keep me comfortable and to lower that nerve pain. But I was on multiple medications at this point, and it was still an investigation on trying to get me comfortable. So, and then day 3, day 4, I got wheeled into a different room at the ICU where I was a little bit more stable. Somebody from physical therapy came in with a board and said, we're going to use this board for you to transport yourself onto a commode or whatnot. Remember, in a hospital, they want you to go to the bathroom too. And I don't know how many days it had been. And they gave me one nurse came in. It was a male nurse. He was really cool. And I said, Kevin, listen, what do you mean a bedpan? I go, show me how to use it. He goes, oh, you just slide it under, and it's like a toilet seat with a bucket, if anyone in the audience knows what a bedpan is. It's like a weird little flat toilet pan that you slide under you while you're in bed and you do your business, your dirty business. And I thought to myself, I can't do that. I could never do that. That's disgusting. Like, my butt doesn't even feel like it's in it totally. What if I miss? And then the nurse has to take it. Gross. I said, I'll crawl on the floor to like the bathroom if I have to, but I'm not using a bedpan. So the next day, a new nurse walks in. Every day it's a new nurse too. At 7 a.m. the nurse shift comes. And this nurse with black hair, I'll never forget it. She was pretty. She opened the door, wrote her name on the board like they all do in the morning. And they're so busy, she didn't really have time to like look at me. She just went, wrote her name on the board, Lori, and she turned around and did a double take and walked over to me and said, "Oh, you poor man, what happened to you?" She grabbed my hand. She held it. Like there was instant like loving nurse, like caring nurse. Not that all nurses are amazing, but this one had like a little special extra in it. And it turns out, and she was talking to me. I said, I can't move my legs. I was in a horrible accident. And she's like, "All right, the notes say we got to get you to use the bathroom. Like, what can I do to help you today to get there?" I said, "I'm not using a bedpan. I'll use a commode and I'll crawl to get there or slide onto it on this board, but I'm not doing the bedpan." She goes, "Okay, I'll get you there. You're not supposed to leave the bed, but I'll make sure we get you there and I'll do what I can all day." And I said, "Don't worry about me. I'm good. My medicine is fine." And she said, "Have you spoken to your family since you've been in the hospital?" I said, "No." And I said, "And I haven't even been able to wash my hand. And if you looked at my left hand, my fingernails were still ripped and bloody with bark stuffed in them. And like my fingernails almost got ripped off. Like I got ripped off the tree." And I said, "I just want to wash my hands and get comfortable. Like I feel so gross. And is there any way to clean up?" Like honestly, since I fell out of that tree, nothing had been like I hadn't been cleaned since. So you can just imagine the feeling of being stuck in a bed and not being able to move. And so she said, "I'll be back and we're going to use my phone. We're going to FaceTime your family. We're going to clean you up. I'm going to give you a dry shampoo." But, so she was like another angel. And it turns out she knew Susan's mother, my wife's mother, and there was a connection there. So it was like another, like meant to be angel in a way.
Synchronicity.
Yes. Yeah, it was really amazing. Looking back, it was just incredible to see that connection. She came back. She gave us the phone. It was the first time I was able to FaceTime my family and for them to see me since the accident. And we all had tears. Somebody took a screenshot of it, of me in bed. And, somebody sent it to my company because everybody at my work was worried. And, everyone wanted to know the update. They thought, I might have died or like, what had happened to Scott after this injury? Because remember, this is during the instant grips of COVID as well. So that was gripping the country. And it was a terrible time. And I was facing this battle completely alone with no family, no friends, nobody to visit, nothing. It was just me wondering what my future was, trying to figure this out in this new mindset of where I was.
It's been 4 days, 5 days. You've gone through a major accident, major surgery, delusions, drug-induced delusions, trying to make sense of everything, all doing this alone with no feeling. You've been in absolute hell for 4 or 5 days by yourself.
Absolutely.
And that's just the beginning of the story. So now walk me through the mental shift that you've had to make starting at that point into looking at yourself in the mirror and reckoning and saying, this is the new normal, right? They used that during COVID, but you really had a really new normal. Walk me through that mentally, that shift, and what did grief and the mindset look like? Did you feel sorry for yourself? Did you ever go into any dark places?
I did. And yes, I'll get to like the next level. So, excuse me. So day 6, I'm not sure how many days I was actually in the ICU. I'm going to say 6 to 8 or maybe 9. because I still had to get stable enough to be transported. My next step in this horrible hell that I was in was to be transported to a rehab facility. And at the time, there's a place called Spalding Rehab in Boston that's very well known. I couldn't get in there because of COVID. They weren't accepting any new patients. So, I didn't know. Outside what I realized, my wife and the entire community was backing me, trying to get like Scott the best care. Again, I didn't know this at the time, but these were the things that were happening behind the scenes. And I got the discharge notice that I'd be, being discharged in a day or two to a rehab facility. So at this point in the hospital, I was still just in this like early recovery mode. So my body was still trauma. I was still feeling the effects of all that anesthesia. I think I finally was able to order like a fruit bowl and French toast, like 4 days later. I feel like it was a long time, and it never tasted so good. I crushed that French toast, and it felt so good. And I was starting to get back into like a comfort zone in a way, if that makes sense. Just being stuck in a bed and not being able to move or do anything. So, and again, I was on a full Foley catheter, it's called, where, it's inserted all the way into your bladder. A balloon is filled, so now the tube can never be pulled out. And actually, I that was a good thing. That was like, all right, a catheter. Because remember, I couldn't feel or do anything from the waist down. So I couldn't even feel like having to pee. But I knew if I was on a catheter, okay, I don't have to worry about this. I can drink lots of fluids. And if I knew I could keep my healthy habits going, is only going to fuel my recovery. So I was very well hydrated. I kept drinking. And I got transferred to a new rehab facility. And I got dropped off all by myself. I got moved into this unit. I got wheeled into this lobby to be checked in. And there I was in the ambulance. The transport people left. So I'm sitting in a bed, completely helpless, with IVs, in this lobby of this rehab hospital because it's COVID and no one's checking in on me. And I'm like deeply embarrassed because I'm so helpless. So I finally get checked in. It took like hours. I couldn't believe it. They put me in a room, and again, no one comes in to say, welcome, here's the next step. I mean, it was awful. And I started to tear up in a way, like, look at my life. I can't, this is horrible. I can't even control anything. And I don't know what these next steps are going to be. Finally, a nurse came in. It was nighttime. She said, are you hungry? I said, sure. She goes, okay, we bring in a standard ham sandwich or whatever it was, chicken salad. And she left again. And then a plain ham chicken salad sandwich came just on white, like Wonder Bread and like a celery stick. It was absolutely pathetic. And I felt like I was in an institution and all I wanted to do was get out of there. And I fell asleep. The next morning, the nurses came in. Obviously, nurses are great. I want to give them all the credit in the world. They were very pleasant. And my new world was starting to take shape. A doctor came in. He needed to test me. He needed to see if I would be able to use my bowels. So they have to do this really invasive test where they use like a little teeny micro probe, and they essentially kind of stick it in your butt to see if you can react to that feeling, to see if you can like clench, I guess. And I heard him say, okay, I saw movement. I think you'll be okay. So I was like, okay, well, that's good. I can't feel anything, but if that's good news, I'll take anything. And they ordered me this new bed because I had a spinal cord injury. So to prevent bed sores, it was a sand and air bed. And I think it cost like $10,000, but it got approved. Anyway, my life was taking shape in rehab. And here's where I became like the saddest and darkest moments of my life. I got settled again to a new room. The next day, a physical therapist came in and introduced herself. She said, my name is Nicole. I'm going to be working with you. We're going to get you started in the gym. We work out once a day for 45 minutes, PT and OT, occupational therapy. You'll be fitted for a wheelchair. Someone will come in to teach you and do all that. Like, boom, all this big list of new things that we're going to do. And like, that was it. It was so sad. It was so, I had no one to talk to or like talk about these steps, and to hear that you're going to be fitted for a wheelchair. That was like my new world. And I remember sitting in my bed, looking out the window, had my head cocked to the window, embarrassed because I couldn't stop crying. And if a nurse walked in, I didn't want her to see my face. And I cried and cried and cried, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, how can this be me? How can this be me? Someone that hiked, the presidential range in New Hampshire twice, the presidential traverse. I've skied the hardest ski trails in America. How can this be me? This isn't supposed to be me. I have more to do, and I just couldn't believe it. And the sadness and the depression that started to build up, and I just got to this place where I don't want to live. There's no way I can live in a wheelchair. How am I gonna go to some house in Maine? How am I gonna go on a dock and jump in the water? What am I gonna do with my boat? I had a boat that I go out and fish. We go to the beach. I'll never be able to feel the sand on my toes ever again. I mean, this was killing me. And the next day came. I got fitted for my wheelchair, and I had to have a lesson on how to, push yourself. And obviously, I'm a strong guy. I figured that out instantly. But, it was like the basics maneuvering. Like he said, okay, now, as we get down the hall, look at the hinges on this door. This door is going to open out. And the person out there is not going to know that there's somebody in a wheelchair. So you're going to have to swing right. I mean, we're talking, this is my life. Like, are you kidding me? This is my life. So I get wheeled down to the rehab. And my first day there, Nicole looks at me, and she was this little girl, and she's a woman, but she was younger, like out of school, I could tell. And I looked at her and I said, Nicole, I know you studied so much to get your master's degree in this. I said, I want you to use everything you studied. I want you to try to do everything in your power you think you can. I don't care if I get hurt. I don't care if I fall. I don't care if something happens to me. I want to walk again. Do everything you can, and do everything you can to my body and my legs to make me walk again. And she said, okay. And I could tell like that I was someone she wanted to work with, right? Like someone who was motivated. And that was my mind. I was like, I'm going to get out of this wheelchair. I have to. And I remember they put me in a harness. It was like 3 people to get me in a harness, one guy in front of me, one guy in back, and I was on these parallel bars. Now remember, I'm really strong from my upper body. And in fact, like I was 49, I feel like I was in the best shape of my life too at that point. So I could hold myself up, no problem, for hours on a parallel bar. But when they lowered that harness and I looked down and I watched my feet hit the floor and I couldn't feel a thing, and the pain was just like incredible, like the burning and the numbness. And it took a guy, Will, this kid in front of me, to move my foot to mimic a step. It took us 45 minutes to do 4 steps. And then I just wanted to collapse back into my wheelchair. And I did. And they were like, great job, like, awesome. And they were full of encouragement. And of course, I tried. I mean, I was sitting there with my eyes shut, trying to mimic walking, thinking like, come on, nerves, like, wake up, something happened. And I got into my wheelchair. Nicole wheeled me back to my room. She got me in my bed, and she said, are you comfortable? Lunch is going to come. We'll work out tomorrow. And when she left, I turned to the window, and I cried. And I said, are you kidding me? 4 steps? 4 steps? That's my life? And like, I cried. It was awful. A nurse came in. I was so embarrassed, and I just couldn't. My body was so sad. And then that depth of sadness like brought me back out. And I finally said, Scott, stop being a pussy. Stop being a loser. Stop crying. You know what? You did 4 steps today. Tomorrow you're going to do 10. And again, so then that's what I did. The next day I did 10 steps. And then I would go back to my room and cry and say, 10 steps? Are you kidding me? This is all I got? Like, I kept having to go through these troughs of the depths of sadness that would bring me back up, though. I'd come out of it, and then I'd come out a little bit more positive. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was my mindset. Like every day, I was going to do something more than I did the previous day. And even though it was minuscule, like not even like your thumbnail or an inch, a centimeter. My gains were like in centimeters. But I said to myself, okay, if that's my life, then I'm going to have to do this for a long time. But I know when I look back, those centimeters will turn into a foot. That foot will turn into 10 feet. That might be 10 years, it might be a year, but I'm going to keep doing this. And at this point, what was happening was I was slowly starting to get feeling. Like if somebody touched my toe, I could feel it. I just couldn't move anything. And I got a phone call. Again, I had a phone. I was talking to my wife. I was talking to my kids. My company at that point had sent what's called a Facebook portal, which was a really cool device. They don't make them anymore, but it's this big screen. And they sent one to my house, one to my rehab. And I could literally just sit in bed and say, call home. And it would call the house on a video screen. So I didn't have to use my hands. I didn't have to move. And I could see my family. So it was a beautiful thing. My company was just amazing for that support. So I had that support, like connection now with the Facebook portal. And a woman called me. Her name was Jacqueline. And she was another angel. And she was telling me about her daughter and the trauma and being paralyzed. And she said, Scott, tell me about, your injury. What are you feeling? And I was like, oh, Jacqueline, it's so sad. I can't feel anything. My legs won't move. I can't feel them. And she's like, yeah, but what if I came over and I touched your foot? Would you be able to feel it? I said, yeah, in fact, I can feel if someone touches my toe. She burst out of the phone and said, oh my God, that's amazing. Like her hope jolted me alive. Hearing her scream how amazing that was, to me, it was nothing, but to her, she ignited like another burst of hope and energy. And she said, you have no idea how awesome that is. You can feel. Even though you can't move, you can feel things are going to happen. Things are going to happen. And she was the woman that runs Project Walk of Boston. And I'll get to her down the road. But she ignited in me something I think triggered another huge sense of hope, right? Like at this point, my life was no hope. And I was getting these little bits of feedback, especially from her. So she ignited something. And I took that okay, I can feel a toe. If I can feel a toe, that means I'm going to move that toe. And I started to get kind of angry at my body and be like, come on, nerves. You can do this. And trying to manifest. And here's where I started to think about, okay, what does a nerve look like? Okay, to me, it looks like I have all this activity in my brain and neurons and all this activity going down my spine. And all of a sudden, boom, it hits this roadblock where my injury is. And it's almost like a toll booth, on a bridge. Only one car gets through, after every 10 minutes of throwing money in the bank. This is the old days before Easy Pass. So I'm thinking of all these threads, fiber optic threads, the color pink. And after that injury, everything down to my legs, my waist, down to my toes is gray. And I said, okay, big toe, just out of the 6 billion nerve fibers that are there, just light one up pink. One out of a billion, which wouldn't make anything move or feel, but it's a new one to connect, right? So that's what I kept envisioning. I kept envisioning somehow getting through to that injury and igniting a new nerve down to my extremities. And I kept doing it. I swear that every day I would envision 1, 4 strands, 8 strands. Again, not enough to make anything happen, but enough to blur that field of dead gray into a couple live strands of nerves. And that was just my vision. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was thinking, but I was just trying to envision what a dead nerve looked like and how we can try to ignite it. And again, progress was being made. And here's where, when I write a book, this is what's going to be the title of my book. But every day I kept having to go through extreme sadness, but I would come out of it and build up a little bit further than the night before. And now I was in OT. I finally got in and had a shower. The girl, I had to be put in a shower chair. And here's a sad thing too. I noticed the atrophy happening instantly. The minute you stop using muscle, the muscle gets lost instantly. I looked in the mirror and caught a glimpse of my behind, and I say I used to have the cutest butt ever. I'm going to interject some humor here, but I looked at it and it looked like a 90-year-old butt, a 90-year-old ass, and I couldn't believe it. And that was so sad to me. And I said, "Oh my gosh!" And anyway, I had a shower. Nothing felt so much better in my life.
Your butt looks not a day past 65 now, by the way. So I commend you for that.
So, all right, things are happening. I was in my wheelchair learning how to fold laundry on a table, learning how to get food out of a refrigerator, because that was my life. I was going to be, home in a wheelchair. But the back of my mind, I said, I'm not going home in a wheelchair. No way. I'll crawl around on my hands and, my drag myself, but I don't want to be in a wheelchair. So, things started to progress. At that point, I felt like one night I was in my room and the nurses would come in and they would, my wheelchair was at the foot of my bed. So, and at this point I was allowed to transfer into my wheelchair on myself and go into the bathroom and things like that. And I was learning how to transfer onto the toilet and things were working that way. Remember, I was strong upper body. I could do a lot of that. And I said, I don't want an alarm. You don't need to alarm me on my bed. I'm not going to fall. I'm not going to get hurt. Just let me have my wheelchair and do what I need to do in my room. And that was okay. But when the nurses came, they had to come every 3 hours to do my medicine and whatnot. And a lot of the times at night, they would forget. They would move the wheelchair out of the way so they could walk around my bed. And one night, I remember, she put it way over near the door. And this is pretty far, probably about 20, 30 feet away. And I was like, oh, I just want to get up and I want to go into the bathroom. Because what I was doing at this point was I would wheel myself into the bathroom and just stare at myself in the mirror and say, this can't be me. This cannot be me. So I got myself out of bed. Now, think of somebody that can't move their legs in the bed, trying to get out of the bed without, cracking your head open or falling. So you slide yourself down. I got my hand on it, and I got myself down into the position where I'm almost seated with my legs straight out in front of me. And I worked myself all the way over to the door. I inched my back against the wall, and I pushed with my hands, and I kind of shimmied myself up against the wall, grabbed my wheelchair, and clumsily and not very smooth, got myself into the wheelchair. So I was able to crawl across the room, using my hands, and get myself shimmied up on the wall and got myself back in the wheelchair. And I didn't blame the nurses, whatever, it wasn't their fault. And I wheeled myself into the bathroom, and I remember staring at myself saying, how is this me? And I, at that point, I would just use my phone. At that point, I had got my phone. Someone dropped off clothes. I got a fresh thing of clothes. My wife had sent in a gift bag and things like that. So I was starting to get comfortable. And this is probably 2 weeks now. 2 weeks have gone by. The next day in occupational therapy, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump ahead here real quickly. I was getting to the point where I said, let's get out of this wheelchair. Let's what's the next step? Can I get in a walker? They said, well, you're not ready for a walker because you haven't demonstrated that you can walk without a harness and whatnot. So I think I try to fool them as much as I can. You know, it was when I was on those parallel bars where I was really using my upper body strength to move my body and saying, see, I can do this. And somehow I got the clear that they were going to put a walker in and help me start to get to learn how to use a walker as well as a wheelchair. Like the wheelchair was always going to be there, but I'll be able to get myself up on a walker and start to do that motion. And remember, for me, I couldn't really use my legs well, but I could inch that walker ahead because I was really strong holding on to it, but I couldn't let go. I was white knuckling that walker like a death grip. So one of those days in occupational therapy, I'm in my walker and we're doing some, trying to fold laundry or get a cup out of the cupboard being in a walker, like learning all these occupational skills, like being at home. He throws a piece of wood down on the ground. Now, the piece of wood was just a plank, like 3 feet long, maybe an inch in height, not even, maybe half an inch in height. I said, what's that? He said, that's a threshold. He's like, you got to get this walker over the threshold. I inched myself up to that board on the ground, and I was frozen in fear. Frozen. And I was looking at it thinking, how do I lift this thing? How do I lift this walker up to get over this little teeny tiny board, which was a threshold? A threshold you're going to encounter everywhere, right? A threshold is an entryway, a point, a doorway to the next level. I couldn't get over this. He's like, come on, you got to try, concentrate. And I lifted the first wheel, the front wheels over on the walker over it, and I pushed it, and I got myself over. It took us, I think, the whole half hour trying to get over that threshold and scared to death. Never been so scared in my life. I turned around and said, gosh darn it, I'm going to do that threshold again because this thing is not going to hold me back in my life. And I turned around, and again, it took me like 10 minutes to get over it, but I did it. And I went back to my room, and you know the story. I got down, I got so sad and said, a threshold? I said, I did do it, but that's pitiful. That's all I can do. And the title of my book is going to be Through the Threshold, because I couldn't believe that was where I was in my life. And that was as bad as it gets if you can't get yourself over a teeny piece of wood that's deemed a threshold. So, and all this time, I'm trying to develop a positive mindset to stay focused and to start to come out of this and build from this small feeling I have. I can feel people touching my feet. At that point, they had taken the catheter out, and the nurses had to come in and self-cath me like every 3 hours. So, again, I was in a pure helpless state, but I felt like things were slowly moving. And that was the mindset that I had to get. And by the way, COVID was now starting to go through the rehab, and there was panic. And nurses were now in full PPE, with shields and gloves, and it was brutal. I was alone in this situation without my family, except being able to see them when I called them on Facebook portal. But I was in this institutional environment where COVID was happening. People had rubber gloves on and shields and face masks, and it was awful. There was no sense of any type of human connection. You know what I'm saying? To help you overcome something like this.
I remember that. And especially if you think back in the day during the pandemic too, we didn't know much about it. It was seen as a fatal disease. So here you are paralyzed, trying to walk again, trying to regain any sense or feeling, and with this overwhelming doom saying, hey, you could also die from this COVID, by the way. So your paralyzed body could end up intubated somewhere as well. So good luck with that.
That's exactly right. And I was like, are you kidding me? I might get COVID. And you're right. It was at that time. Everyone was like, if you get COVID, you're going to die. You're not going to be able to breathe. You'll be intubated. So here I am saying, okay, how can I do this? How do I try to learn how to walk when I'm going to have COVID, if I'm going to get COVID? And sure enough, they came in and tested me. I tested positive. I was livid. And I got tested positive. And at that point, I was like, okay, you know what? Bring it on. Like, it can't get any worse for my life right now. So, sure, let's get COVID. This is going to be great. And I wasn't even afraid of COVID at the time. I was more like, I'm not worried about it, but I was kind of angry that, somehow I got it in this building. And having COVID in this rehab hospital, I had to get moved to the COVID floor. So now I lost all the people I was working with. I lost my OT person. I lost my Nicole, the PT person, and I had to get a whole new staff that was all gonna, live in the world of COVID. They had to sign something that they didn't care. So I had to get a whole new team. I was in a whole new gym that was much smaller. Like, the facility was smaller, and there I was. And luckily, I didn't have any symptoms, so I didn't get any. Nothing happened to me. I was one of those people that didn't have any symptoms, but I had COVID. So I got through that. And again, I would get so depressed at night. And at this point, my wife, I talked to her at night, and she said, "Hey, do you mind if Father Dan calls you?" And this is her priest, at her, at the Catholic Church. And up in this point, I had seen some really amazing, beautiful things happen, like, Marie, kind of like that angel. Lori, the nurse, another, like, what I would call angel. These things that happened because, again, there was a huge community of support that was occurring behind the scenes that I didn't realize. And, I don't know if you want me to get into this, but Father Dan called me, and this was that night. It was dark. I was in my room, and he said, we were chatting. He's like, I've heard about your injury. I'm so sorry. It must be bad. And, very calm, very nice. And this guy is like, he's really cool. I've known him too. Like, we see him out in the boat, and really, really nice guy. And to this point, I grew up, not religious. I just was never introduced to, to God, and never knew what that relationship was, or even what it meant. So we were talking, and he said, "You mind if we pray?" And remember, at this point, I was completely open to anything out there, energy, spiritual, like anything in the universe. Like, my body is open. Come and accept and do what you must, but, help me heal. Like, I was completely open. Remember, before I went into the operation, I surrendered myself, like, because I had no control. And my mind shift at this point was open to anything. I want to walk again. I need help from everything. Like, call out the universe, healers, energy, whatever it was, faith, God. And he said, "Do you mind if I pray?" So his words were, Jesus Christ, Scott had this terrible injury. Please look at him laying in this bed. Jesus, you remember when those spikes went through your feet, you felt that nerve pain in your legs, in your feet, and that pain radiate you. And at that point, what happened, it was a three-way call between myself, Father Dan, and Jesus Christ. I instantly saw the spikes being driven through his feet, the blood, the twinge of his body in pain. I felt his pain. I felt all that emotion of the trauma that Jesus Christ felt. And there was an instant connection of something I had never experienced in my life. And this was surreal to me and real to me and powerful. And I felt that I saw, like, the crucifixion in a way. I even saw, like, Jesus Christ's face, right there with his eyes shut in pain, the same way my eyes were shut in pain. And he prayed. Father Dan was like, help Scott, help those nerves heal and regenerate. And that's when, what I described to you, those threads that were dead and gray and pink. And I envisioned, all of a sudden, I saw a flash of, like, more light up. And I just felt this warmth, this amazing connection. And, he might have said a few things, but I was so caught in this three-way conversation and this three-way, like, reality. It was literally like Jesus Christ was right there. I could see it all. And I could witness and feel his pain because we went through the same pain in our legs, and that nerve pain, horrendous. And obviously he suffered way worse than I did, but that was like something that brought us close and connected. And, I said, Father, thank you. And I was in tears, I was crying, and it was a nice, cry. I felt like it was not like a sad cry. It was
A release.
release. Yeah. And I remember hanging up, and just nothing like that had ever happened to me in my life to that point. And that's when I thought of Marie and Lori and everyone that was religious out there that was praying for me. And, the power of prayer when hundreds of people pray for one thing, like, I think that's how miracles happen. And again, I'm naive and I'm new to this, but that's what I felt. And after that, the next day, I got moved to a new room because things were just like, I remember I was up on the COVID floor, so either new people were coming in or what. So I got moved to a new floor. And the next night, the nurse left my wheelchair by the door again. So I went through this routine to go, crawl through the floor and shimmy myself up and get in the wheelchair. And I didn't have a catheter at that point, and I was sitting there trying, I'd go in the bathroom, I'd sit in the toilet and try to manifest trying to go to the bathroom, but I still couldn't feel anything. And I'm staring at myself in the mirror. And I had my phone. I believe I even recorded this. And my hair was getting long. I needed a shave. Like, I just felt terrible. And I was staring at myself in the mirror, like, again, why me? How can this be me? I just couldn't believe it. And I looked behind me, and I saw something up near the ceiling. And now the ceilings were like 12 feet tall. Like, housekeeping couldn't have gotten up that high. And I turned around, and I looked way up into the ceiling. And this is a room that I just got moved to. And there was a tiny crucifix way up. I'm not kidding. I took a picture of it. There's a tiny crucifix in the tile. And to me, it looked like it was a pencil drawing. And it was small, but it was detailed enough. Like, what the crucifix looks like, when Jesus is on it, his knees are bent a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It had the knees were bent, like that little, and I took a picture of it. I zoomed in, of course, like with an iPhone, when you take a picture of something and then zoom in it's not as clear, but I have a picture of it, and it was a crucifix, and I couldn't believe it. But then I said, I do believe it, because the conversation I had yesterday, like, it was the three of us, and I saw Jesus Christ right in front of me, and I saw his legs, and I saw his feet, his naked feet with the spikes through it, and I said to myself, I said, yes, like, he's here, he's gonna help me. And the next day, as we got trying to work on my walker again, I was stronger, and I went over that threshold again, this time on the first try, and things were better that day. And I kept making progress. Again, we're talking minuscule, but it was progress. And I even made a promise, as, again, I'm new to this. I remember speaking and praying, again, being naive and new, but saying, like, look, I'm not asking, like, for you to do anything for me. This is me talking to Jesus Christ, but saying, I'm going to do all the hard work. I'm going to do it. But just all the hard work I do, just give me, like, a hair of an ounce, a glimpse of that it's working, so I can keep going. And I knew that it was all up to me to do this, but there was that hope, that's faith, right? That was a new little, spark of faith that would turn into a bonfire soon. Is where it started, like, to keep pushing forward. So that's where, like, all of this is starting to manifest in my mindset, in my body, in my spiritual journey. And it was actually quite beautiful. I've never felt something like it before. And again, the next day, more progress. The next day, more progress. And, again, behind the scenes. And then insurance at this point, if you plateau in an injury like this where insurance is paying every day, which costs exorbitant amounts of money to keep somebody in a hospital, the minute you plateau, you're done. They send you home. And I don't know if I caught wind of this or the case manager or my wife told me that, but I said, I'll stay here for a year. I'm never going to plateau. I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to keep making gains. And I want everyone to keep documenting this. But I'm not leaving here. I'm not going home. I'm not leaving in a wheelchair. I'm going to leave at least in a walker, but I'm staying. I'm here to stay. I'm alone. I've been doing this myself the whole time. I can handle it this far. I'm not going home until of course I wanted to go home, right? Who wants to be in a hospital during COVID all alone? But I knew that I was on this journey to walk again, and I was going to make it happen.
You had unfinished business.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and you had a plan, and you knew what you wanted to accomplish. So talk to me more about that. And you mentioned, the spark that turned to the bonfire. Tell me, what does that mean?
So I would say, that conversation where Father Dan and I had the conversation, the three-way, that was something brand new to me. And then, how powerful it was, like I described, how, I could see the pain Jesus Christ felt and the connection that we had because of the same pain. That was a spark of, and then the next day when I saw that sign of the crucifix and I thought of Lori and Marie and these angels and other people, that was a spark that I started to think that this is maybe what faith looks like. And that just started to grow. And when I talked to Jacqueline again, that woman that called me, she was faithful. She started telling me about stories of like miraculous, her daughter walking again after 11 years. And she was so excited that I could feel things. And at this point, I remember I was in my bed and I was looking at my legs and I'm like, come on, move. And I remember the sheet actually moved, not on my feet, but my knee. Like I could see something move. If there was a nurse there, they probably wouldn't have noticed, but I saw it. And I knew right then and there that was the start. Like I was going to walk. I saw my leg move in a little bit. And I don't even think I even made it happen. I think it just did it. But I knew right then and there, I had got the feeling back in my feet. Like if people could touch my toes, I could feel that. So I had that sensation. And it started in the feet and it was like slowly moving its way up the knees, if that makes sense. So like I couldn't really feel my calves. And remember, this whole time, I'm in excruciating nerve pain to this day. But then it was way worse. Like your IT bands that go down the sides of your thighs, those were on fire. And it was almost like an insatiable itch. Like if I dug my fingers into my sides of my thighs where that, what's it called?
IT band?
IT band, yes. I couldn't get deep enough to like satiate that painful itch and burning. So I was on baclofen, I was on gabapentin and narcotics and so many drugs to try to keep my pain at bay. But that pain had never ended. But what was happening was I was getting things happening in my leg and, that was helping me start to manifest my toes moving. And I was starting to look down at my feet and remember concentrating, making those threads turn from gray to pink. And, that's where that spark started to turn into a campfire and then grow and grow and grow. And the more people like Jacqueline that called me and Susan and then Father Dan, the more people that brought in another hope of faith also like built that within me. I was starting to see connections. So that's how that started to grow. And one of the trainers that I was working with, her name was Kathleen, she saw my determination. And, another thing I'll mention, when I was working out this whole time, we were all in this room, like we were obviously like 8 feet apart because of COVID, but there were other people there too. It wasn't just me. There was, another spinal cord injury person. There was maybe a stroke person. We were all in the gym typically at the same time, like working out with our physical therapist. I was there and I would I was there ready to work. I even told every day, I tell my therapist, remember, I don't care if I fall. I don't care if I get hurt. I don't care if I trip and fall and break an arm. I'm not going to sue anybody. Don't worry about me. Just do what you can to make me walk again. And I would be grunting and groaning and like trying to like walk. And I was the only one in that whole gym doing that. I looked around. I saw people not even caring like that they were getting like treated with these amazing physical therapists. They wouldn't even try. I even remember this one guy. I can see his face right now. He was probably like a little bit older than me, but I remember they were trying to get him to move his leg, and he was complaining and yelling and screaming. And I was like, dude, you have no idea how much pain I'm in, but you'll never hear me scream. You'll never hear me tell the whole world how much pain I'm in. And he wanted another pain pill, and he just wanted to go back to his room. I wanted to go over to his neck and throttle him and say, buddy, you're never going to get out of here if you act like that. But I realized that's the mindset. And, and listen, my mind too was saying, go back to the wheelchair. It's comfortable. Go back to bed. It's painful when you try to work out. But I just tried to fight through all that because I had a goal in mind, was to walk again. And, this woman, Kathleen, saw my determination, and she said, Scott, I know you told me that when you go home, you have a set of stairs to get into your house. I said, yeah, it's about 8 steps. She's like, all right, I'm going to get you to get those, to learn how to train to get up to those 8 steps so you can go home on a walker. And she literally would come after her shift, and we would go to the back staircase, and she would help me practice going up and down one flight of stairs. Remember, like I could really hold on tight to the railing and drag myself down, but she was really making me put weight on my legs, use my legs, making a new connection in my brain happen. Like, she was really working like helpful. I don't want to get her in trouble, but I don't know if she was supposed to be doing that, because we were like in this back staircase all alone and no one seemed to know we were back there, but that was okay for me. And, we would go up and down, and she would dedicate about an hour. This is after she was out of work, but before she went home. So we were working hard on this, trying to like do stairs. And, at that point I could get over a threshold, and I was able to manage the walker better and better. But again, I was still like technically in a wheelchair. So, time goes on, and, my discharge date is now on the calendar, because insurance is like, all right, you're going to be discharged at some point. How about, May 20th? So I think I had been in there now like a month. Like, there's been a while. And I see my discharge date and say it's like, 6 days away. So now I'm like in my head freaking out. Like, all right, now it's go time. Now it's train even harder. And now look at your legs and make sure like things are moving. So I would keep manifesting like a toe wiggle. And sure enough, not a toe, but like all 5, like I could bend my foot a little bit, like not wiggle a single toe, because that requires like so much nerve and detail and concentration. But I was starting to see a little bit of movement in one leg only. It was my left side, like started to come back like a little bit. So I knew things were happening. And again, I was manifesting that, like those threads turned to pink, those gray dead threads. And then that where my injury was, how to open up that channel. Like, what is wrong with the spinal cord? How do we open that up? So I was trying to work on this mindset that I didn't know about. But again, that was the fire that was inside that was starting to burn bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was just a positive mindset, and again, being someone who's physically active his whole life, that knows about muscle and, weight training. And, I've been a very active guy my whole life. So I knew what my body needed too. So I was only ordering like plain chicken breasts, peanut butter, oatmeal, like just the basics of like protein to stay strong, because the food that they offered was horrible. I couldn't believe, like, how do you recover when you're getting like plain white bread, ham, like just, mashed potatoes that come out of a, instant, like just non-nutritional things. Like, so I'm like, whatever was on the menu that was real food, that's all I ordered. Like, give me 3 chicken breasts, a bowl of oatmeal and peanut butter. That's all I'll eat for dinner. But because my body, I knew that I needed that nutrients to get strong. And I knew that I had years ahead of me of just horrible, like, rehab and training. And so I needed to get out of there strong. So we worked on the staircase. My discharge date was looming. And long story short, sure enough, I got myself out of there. Obviously, they wouldn't let me go out until I was off the premises, about to get into the car. But I wheeled myself. I got myself out of the wheelchair, and I walked myself to the car with my beautiful family that was waiting for me to pick me up after so long. And I got myself into the car to go home. And anyway, I kind of sped through that last section, but that's where I was. And I got out of there on a walker.
Such a victory.
Yes.
Especially, fast forwarding a little bit more to even meet up with me today. You walked in here. No walker, no crutches, no wheelchair. On your own.
Right.
And obviously that was the start of the second part of the third part of the journey, really, right? And you planted the seeds to what I would dare to call a full recovery by relatively, right? Compared to being in that hospital or being in that ambulance, closing your eyes, not being able to open anything, looking at the new normal, your real new normal. It is miraculous, however you want to call it. Whether you want to call it religion or faith in the universe, I have so many thoughts and so many notes that I've made, just knowing what we know now. You and I have talked about law of attraction, and you keep using the word manifestation too.
Right.
And just a quick comment on that too. The scientific explanation of manifestation, it's quantum physics. It's observer effect. You look at neutrons, electrons, and the double slit experiment with photons. These things only appear in science when you look for them. When you believe that they're there and you look for them, they appear. And that is the scientific basis of manifestation. So for you, I'm not surprised at all to hear you literally picturing neurons, dendrites, the neural connections going from gray to pink, and regeneration of sorts. And for anybody that's saying that's bullshit, the fact that you walked in here is all the proof anybody needs. It's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't want to cut you off if you've, I agree with that. And that has led me, my life now is so different than it was before this injury, meaning I'm so open. I understand energy in your body and how it flows. And by the way, I'll give you a statistic. And I think I can say this about myself, but all the studies and all the research I've done, it's true. In this country, I think there's about 300,000 people living with a spinal cord injury. A spinal cord injury in this country happens 2 times every hour. So every hour, 2 people in this country have a spinal cord injury. Less than 1% from any spinal cord injury is a full recovery. So meaning anyone with an incomplete or a complete paralysis from a spinal cord injury, less than 1% walk again with a full recovery. I'm not saying I'm fully recovered because I do have a little bit of a deficit on my right foot, but I'm walking again. So I am going to be bold enough to call myself I'm within that 1% or the less than 1% of walking again after spinal cord injury of what the magnitude that I faced.
I don't think that's bold whatsoever. Again, just the fact that you can, if I told you to stand up and walk around right now, you could do it. And that is nearly impossible for most.
Right.
And you mentioned energy, and even thinking about it, what we know, I've talked about some of the beliefs and readings that we've done with Dr. Joe Dispenza and how energy is just all vibrational frequencies. That woman that freaked out on the phone when she heard that you had feeling in your big toe, feeling, not even movement, feeling. You described that as when she was so elated, it transferred that energy, that raised your vibrational level. And then if you think about it, that was maintained during your recovery. You would come in and less than 1% of people make this kind of recovery, right? So imagine that from the PT's perspective. For every 100, you get less than one person that's going to sit there and say, no, mother effer, I'm not getting wheeled out of here. I'm going to walk out of there. And think about what that energy did to them. They didn't say, no, sit your butt back down. You're not going to do this. They said, all right, let's do this.
Right.
It's that energy transfer, and even just hearing the story from me. It's so easy to give yourself pity parties day in, day out until you have perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. She did. I'll never forget it to this day, that she ignited something. You're right. She put me in a whole new level, like, of hope, and it was energy. And I think that's what really jump-started and kicked me into, I'm never going to stop again. Because if she's saying I have feeling in a toe, but I can't feel my legs, and that's amazing to her, and she's so excited about it, there's got to be something behind it. And that's, that totally did bring me into that next level where I never thought I had.
Well, from my perspective too, I think a crucial part of the story, all of this energy transfer, all this manifestation and this belief, it's complemented, and a necessary component and magic part of this recipe was your mindset. To hear you go, I only took 4 steps. And you go, I took 4 steps. I'm going to take 10 tomorrow. By the way, you didn't even double the number. Double was 8. You could go, I'm going to take 10 the next day. And then to do it, I think that's a magic sauce too, that I think a lot of people, because I was listening to your story, and to be brutally honest, I can't tell you that I wouldn't be in the same position taking 4 steps and at the end of the day going, this ain't happening. Just give me the shot. I'll take the wheelchair, whatever. Give me an electric wheelchair. I'm good.
Yeah.
And I think so many people, obviously like the gentleman that you described, unfortunately have that mindset. And it's a metaphor for life.
Yeah.
So shifting gears, this whole mindset that carried you through this belief and this being witness of, if you're religious, you call it a miracle. If you're spiritual, you call it a miracle. What does your life look like today in terms of wanting to pay things forward and changing other people's lives? You mentioned a book. What's the purpose behind that? What else has affected your outlook on others now?
Well, my life certainly turned a complete 180. Since there, I did embrace, religion, because I knew something was there. I mean, obviously that happened to me. I have a whole new, respect and, a following for that. Totally respect religion and that faith, and people are so lucky that have faith. Looking back at my life, I wish I had it when I was younger, growing up. It maybe would have changed my life back then, but only looking forward. And another thing too, when I got home, so after, I know I sped up, but when I was discharged and I got home, I got up those steps, and, it was just so awesome to see my kids, and my wife and my family was so amazing. And, I didn't realize the trauma they suffered, but they were so strong and so supportive of me. And I kind of saw a little bit of role reversal, like in my kids, and, my son, like, I'd get frustrated. He'd be like, Dad, baby steps, like he was talking to me like a parent to a kid. Like, he's like, Dad, you can't get bummed out. It's gonna take time. Like, he was trying to reinforcing me. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing to see and witness. And when I got home, I was comfortable. I couldn't get upstairs to my bedroom, but there was like a different living room, like only up a smaller set of stairs, where they had set up a bed for me and a whole new, like almost like a suite, which was wonderful. They did so much work to prepare for my coming home, like in a wheelchair. Like, what's this new normal going to look like? But when I was there, like that next week, some friends had come by. Somebody left me the book called Becoming Superhuman by Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Supernatural.
I'm sorry, Becoming Supernatural. Yes, sorry. And I had never heard of him before, never heard of this book, but I quickly read his bio and what had happened to him
Yeah.
and was amazed.
Bicycle accident, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
spinal cord injury, worse than mine, I think his C from his neck down. And that gave hope. And so I started to dive into this book. And for those that haven't read this book, or for those that do know about this book, it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly deep, and it's just amazing because it talks so deep about meditating, the mind, the body, energy. He teaches you about that energy flow and how it affects other people, and people's other energies can, come into you. And it's a lot to really it's not an easy book to comprehend or to get. But what I learned from it was, okay, you have to learn how to meditate and still try to manifest these nerves again. These in my version of my dead gray millions of strands of fiber optic dead nerves. I'm trying to turn them pink again and light up. And what he teaches you is it's as a meditation, and it takes a lot of concentration to get into that point. But I had a lot of time. I couldn't do anything, couldn't really move. So I was really up in my little room, especially at night when the family went to bed, and I would practice. And you need to have silence. If a dog barks, that can kind of mess everything up. But I started to practice his teachings and, start, the way I feel like my eyes would roll back in the back of my head, and I would just work my way down, like from my brainstem, spinal cord again. And then I got to that injury. And I was like, okay, all these beautiful nerves are alive right at this injury. How do we open this channel up? How do we open up a little bit? And I would just meditate that and think about it and reconstruct that, kind of like what he did to his body. Again, everyone is different, but in my world and the way I was trying to was just trying to open up a new channel. Again, even if it was a billion nerves and I saw one light up, that was success to me, because I knew it's one more and it's a long road ahead. Remember, I told Jesus Christ that moment when I first had that moment with him that I was going to do the work. It was up to me, but just keep showing me like an ounce of like thread that it's working, and I'll never stop. And, Joe Dispenza's work, I love the energy. I love now thinking like, am I feeling this person's energy? Now I kind of feel like I connect only now with people that have energy, that I'm more aware of that. And I've met people like that I never would have met before in my life hadn't I like come down this journey. So I did want to mention that because that was really interesting. And, the friend that gave me that book, her name is Mel, and, I appreciate that. So,
and it's funny how you and I lost touch, relatively speaking, just because of geographical distances in life, right? But when we both connected on this subject, it was almost uncanny. We're like, oh, you too, yeah, you understand energy fields and the torus field and the different chakras and how to activate and vibrational frequencies. So, yeah, I think we're getting towards the end of the story.
yes.
I want to turn it over to you and say, two questions. Do you have any words of wisdom, advice, uplifting thoughts for anybody going through a hard time? I use that term loosely. It could be a bad day or it could be a traumatic injury. Let's start with that question first. Go ahead.
I would. Listen, like everyone in life, everybody is going to have an instant that changes their life, or they're going to face a massive difficulty. You can guarantee it's going to happen if it hasn't already happened to you before. But during those times of difficulty, and if it's not as trauma as mine, or it's worse, everyone has to stop and think that you're in a terrible situation. Your mind now has to somehow think positively. And I know that sounds so cliche, and I wish I could mind bend the words to sound like better or more scientific. But you need to start with thinking a little bit positive and motivate yourself. Because if you don't start with that little bit of a better positive mindset, you're never going to get to that next level. And when you get into those situations where it's time to work on something, whether it's like maybe it's a childhood trauma, maybe it's an accident, you're trying to get through an injury like me, you have to push through and work through the difficult part of it. And everyone's scenario is different. And again, I know this is probably sounding so cliche that everyone's heard this advice their whole life. But those are the two biggest things. And then lastly, I feel like gratitude, there's not enough that's out there. And I feel such gratitude. First of all, when I woke up and I thought I was almost like in heaven because the room was white and there was a window there, but I knew I was alive, I instantly said to myself, I'm alive and I'm thankful. And then, I thank my family, my wife, people that supported me, friends, the company, people at work. There was just so much love and outpouring that I have totally shifted my view that I will have gratitude for everything, for everything there is. And, am I sad that I can't do things like I used to do? Sure. But you know what? I'm alive and I'm doing things I never thought I would have done. And I'm doing things and meeting people I never would have had this happen to me. So I would just tell people that you're going to face trauma in your life. You're going to face adversity. You're going to face something that changes your life forever. And even if it's the case you are, one of the cases I mentioned, there's a spinal cord injury. I work with spinal cord injuries now. I work for a foundation called the Victorious Victory Foundation. We help spinal cord injury people get the help they need right away with equipment, with things that they need to make their lives better. And it's a community that's amazing. There's people out there that have horrible outcome than I do, that are stuck in a mechanical wheelchair for the rest of their lives. But I see in them, they'll smile. They've either accepted their injury, but they realize that they're alive. And I love helping this community. And, I fundraise, I do everything I can to help that community. But those are the things that I'm doing now to give back and also to help motivate people, because I've seen a few people, I've been called to bedsides where someone's been injured, like, young kids too, like sports injuries, and given them some insights onto like, listen, you have a long road. There's no doubt it's painful and it's a long road ahead, but every day you can do better than the day before. And you have to remember that your progress isn't measured in miles. It's measured in centimeters, sometimes millimeters. But guess what? Those millimeters add up. And you'll know that when you're in the first few months of a rehab and of a recovery. So, and that could be for anything.
My second question was going to be, do you have any final words? But I think that you captured that so beautifully. Do you have anything else you want to add other than that?
At first, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. And it's been an amazing journey. I'm still blessed. I've got a lot of work left to do. And I think that this is great to get these words out there to people. And, I will say, people have been saying, you're so inspirational, I look around, I say, I feel like I'm not, because I feel like anyone could do this. But, if I can spread this message and if I could spread this word, to be open-minded, to give yourself into energy and to keep looking forward into ways to improve yourself in any way, especially when you're faced with these traumatic injuries, when you open yourself up and let yourself go, things happen, and things happen positively. So, kind of the things we already covered, but I appreciate this time and I appreciate you having me on this.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your story and you coming here and telling your story. I think it is an inspiration. You are an inspiration. I think it's just absolutely remarkable. I mean, look at the statistics. It really is less than 1%. Mm-hmm. But my question now, hearing your story, and especially it's easy to say this as a sideline judge, right? And saying that less than 1% odds, I wonder if it would be, how much higher it would be if people could adopt your mindset and adopt your beliefs and understanding of not just positivity, right? But the fundamental principles behind that. You are no pun intended, a walking example of manifestation, law of attraction. When you start focusing on the positives, more positive things will come. When you focus on the negatives, that's all you're going to see. It's that red car theory that we talk about, right? When if you only think about red cars, you're going to see more and more of them, and because you're looking for them. And you know what you're not going to see? The white cars. You won't have any idea what's happening. So you can either apply that to positivity or negativity. Whatever you look for, you're going to see. And you're not going to see the other part. The counterpart, the opposite. So, Scott, thank you again. I truly appreciate you talking to me, and it's been so nice to catch up, and thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's been awesome. It's been great to connect again. I appreciate this.
Viktor Frankl once wrote, "When we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Scott's story is a living example of that truth. From staring down a diagnosis that said he might never walk again to stepping inch by inch over the literal and metaphorical thresholds in his life, his journey reminds us that healing happens on every level: body, mind, and soul. If something Scott said today lit a fire in you, take a moment to follow or subscribe to the show. If you feel called, leave a review. It means more than you know. You can also find more episodes where you're listening now on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple. And if you know someone facing their own impossible moment, send this to them. Be the reason they believe in possibility again. Until next time, keep going, keep healing, and keep becoming.